Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Stefan, and we are here with Malayalees for Black Lives Matter in partnership with Brown Girl Magazine and Spinster.io to discuss racism in entertainment. As many of you guys know, this is part of our structural racism series in an effort to educate our population and our community about how we can combat racism and build an anti-racist world. So if you haven't already, please like our Facebook page. Please join our private Facebook group and follow us on Instagram at Malayalees for Black Lives Matter. We have an excellent and incredible panel today, so I'm super excited to discuss this because this is a very relevant topic and also a very trending topic. People always want to talk about racism in entertainment, how that relates to race bending and cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is a really hot topic. So we're going to sort of get into the definitions and sort of the storyline of how this entire panel came to be. And so I would like all of us to share a little bit about ourselves, if we can all share a brief introduction, and we will take it from there. As you all know, my name is Cindy Stefan. I'm part of the core team for Malayalees for Black Lives Matter. I'm an activist, an educator, and an actor here in New York City. And yeah, we're ready to begin. So anyone take it away.
I'll jump in. My name is Desi K. Robinson. I'm a health and lifestyle journalist and educator, and my work is around the intersections of pop culture and public health. And so I unpack lots that have to do with representation and the ways in which we can use media in a great way rather than a harmful way to ameliorate the lives of marginalized people. And I'm very happy to be here to be able to chime in and speak from my perspective as a Black girl from the Bronx living here in Harlem.
Thank you, Des.
Hi, I'm Ben Poster. I'm a filmmaker here in New York City. I'm a director who does a lot of documentary style work, and I also have my own production company in which I do a lot of commercial work. Also how I met Cindy and Shanti here. I originally hail from the desert of Tucson, Arizona, but have been in New York City for about 8 years now. And just to be clear, it's the greatest city in the world. So I just want to state that for the record. Really, really happy to be here and feel thankful to be included in this conversation. Looking forward to it.
I'll jump in. Guys, I'm Shanti Blanchard. I'm the co-founder of Spinster. I identify as, I guess, being mixed race. So my dad is white. My mom is from Malaysia, which is in Southeastern Asia, but her family's family is from South India. Yeah, I am originally from Southern Illinois, which is right by the Kentucky border in the middle of nowhere. But I live now in Brooklyn, and to just bounce off of Ben, I personally think Brooklyn's better than Manhattan. And it is, New York in general is the greatest city, and it's coming back. I don't even know why people are saying it went away. It didn't go away. It's here.
Cool. I'll go, I guess. So my name is Brandon Haynes, and I am a director and cinematographer. Also, I run a production company as well, Gorilla Wolf. Specialize in small form content, short form content productions. And I am a Brooklyn, New York native, and I will agree with Shanti. Brooklyn is the best. And I identify as Black to the core. Yeah, and that's it about me for right now.
Oh God, I'm outnumbered. Boogie Down 1, Brooklyn 2.
We got Queens 1.
All right, so I guess I'm the only person who hasn't been to New York City, or I think I've been through the state of New York on the way to Canada, but that's about it. But my name is Jyotis, Jyotis James. I'm a PhD student at Texas A&M University in the Department of Philosophy. My research interests are critical race theory, anti-colonial epistemology, which just means ways of knowing that directly fight against colonialism and ways of knowing that are non-European. And where I'm from, I really don't know where to answer. I'm currently residing in Texas, but obviously I am Malayali. I'm on the core team for MBLM, just like City. And yeah, that's really it. I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Thank you all for joining us. I mean, this is such a great panel, and what's great about it is that we're so diverse, like diverse in culture, in race, from where we're from, and so much to share. So I'm ready to get into it. We're ready to get into it. So how this conversation started is really because a couple months ago, as you all know, the BLM movement took a global revolution, right? That's exactly what was happening. It was able to expand and be able to be recognized by multiple nations across the globe that this is a necessary discussion we need to have. This is a necessary cause we need to fight for. And so myself as being in an activist space, I also forgot to share how I identify. I identify as a South Indian Malayali Kana woman with an X in the spelling. And so in that process, me having been in the activist space before, when we're speaking about entertainment is all about storytelling, right? And this entire conversation is birthed from a story and a conversation that me and Shanti had because of a particular situation that happened. And so this is a situation, as many of you guys know, had been involved in a few of the protests. And I had come back from one of the protests in June, and I literally was like I was literally sitting on my bed, and I was just deep in thought, and I was literally eating a burger. This is literally how it happened. I was on my bed, I was eating a burger, and I was just getting angered. I was like, where is the Malayali community? Like, how come we're not showing up for Black lives, right? And I've shared this before, back in 2013 when Trayvon Martin was killed, when all of these activists have been speaking up about it, but where I was looking for, where is our community in all of this? Like, how come we're not speaking up, right? Because throughout my life and in many Malayali lives that I've spoken to, people that I've spoken to have shared that there has been a lot of anti-Black racism within the Malayali community, and how do we dismantle that? So I had, randomly made a post after that protest it was a call to action for the Malayali community, for the South Asian community, the brown community, to step up. Like, we really need to call out racism within our families, within our friend circles, because that type of rhetoric still exists. And I just posted it and I went to sleep. 12 hours later, my phone was blowing up. It had gone viral. I was being contacted by a number of agencies nationally. I was being contacted by a number of news sources from India and in the US. And I was just like completely bombarded with all these messages, and I didn't know what to do about it. In the midst of that, I saw that the comment section was also blowing up. And there were a few commentators, 2 Malayali commentators and 1 Black commentator, who had expressed that 1 year ago on my Instagram, there was a Subway commercial. I had done a commercial as an actor. I had done a commercial for Subway, the Subway sandwich. And that Subway sandwich commercial had elements of appropriation. It was appropriative, and it was co-opting Black culture. And as they commented on my MBLM video, they had shared, well, it's really hypocritical for you to be talking about BLM when you appropriated culture, when you did this Subway commercial. And I didn't disagree with them. I responded to their comments and I said, I completely agree with you. I had a very deep conflict while I was on set about this specific issue. And, I had discussed it with several people. And then even though I had mentioned that, and I did comment that, and I said to them, yes, I do agree that it is appropriation, they had come back and shared, well, why don't you delete it? Why don't you delete it from your Instagram? And my response to that was, well, I'm not going to delete it because me erasing it from Instagram doesn't change the fact, or doesn't erase the act of complicity. And while I am a brown woman, right? And I identify as one. And yes, I am racialized in the United States, but I will never know what it means to be Black in this country, right? And so I know that as a person who is outspoken, as a person who is an activist, that I will speak up, but I will also make mistakes, and my mistakes coexist with my progress. And so that was what I had shared with the comment section, and they still demanded that I take it down. they ended up spamming me. So I had to block them. Me being my old millennial self, I didn't know that blocking also deleted the comments. But then they had reached out to elders within the Malayali community. And then the elders were talking to me, well, why don't you address this? I said, I already addressed it. I literally shared that I was complicit in doing this commercial. I do agree with that. And so after some conversation, I had to reopen the comment section, which was so brutal at a time when we were really focusing on the movement, like our feet were on the ground, like we really needed to focus on that. So I really didn't have a lot of energy or time to address them in a more holistic way. Evidently, I did open up back the comments and they were like, well, you blocked and deleted us. I was like, well, I blocked you, but I didn't delete you. And going back and forth, I actually invited them. I was like, going back and forth in the comment section is not productive. Let's just get on a Zoom. And all of them evidently declined the Zoom. And so at that point, I could not do anything much further. I shared what I needed to share and I invited them to a conversation. And so I put a pin in it. I said, when I have time and when, the media attention has died down, which now it has, and BLM, I'm looking at sort of the evolution of the news cycle and I'm still like, okay, we're 3 months in, where are all the brown people? It's not just a trend, right? We have to show up regardless of it being a trend. And so at three months, which is where we're now, 2 to 3 months, I was like, okay, Shanti, I reached out to Shanti. Shanti was the casting director for Subway. And Ben was the director and producer for the Subway ad. So I was like, okay, let's really have a deeper conversation about this because it's one that needs to be had, regardless of my interaction with them or our disagreements between the comment section. This is a conversation that needs to be had at large because it is a continuing and pervasive issue. And so that's why we're here, and that's why all of you lovely panelists have come here to speak, and I thank you all for joining us. But this is one of those topics and those concerns where it's necessary that members of our community acknowledge and own up to our anti-Blackness and our complicity, and how do we move forward? How do we create spaces where we're able to dismantle that? So the intention for this conversation is really, one, to unpack the entertainment industry and how it co-opts Black culture and how that's harmful to Black people. And the second intention is, how do non-Black POC, like myself as a brown woman, show up in entertainment spaces when we're operating in a binary America, when America knows the white race and the Black race, right? But all the races in between is like, okay, so well, where do we put them as a racialized people? And so understanding how to show up in that space is important for me. And Des and Brandon, I would really like your advice for that as well. So in sharing this story, I wanted everyone to know what the Subway commercial looks like, and then we'll get into the conversation. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna quickly screen the Subway commercial so you guys have an idea of what it looks like and the appropriative factors it had in it. So I'm going to pull that up right now. And I'm hoping that you guys can you guys see this? Oh, okay. Is everyone able to see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Hey y'all, just got me the new release of the garlic steak and provolone ciabatta. The accents of garlic aioli have me sold. This is the perfect fit. Just got me the new release of the garlic steak and provolone ciabatta. Y'all see this tender steak on that new ciabatta bread? Garlic aioli really kicking up the flavor. What? Okay, so that's what the Subway ad looked like. And as I was going through the motions of being on set, I didn't realize what was happening until like the day of, right? And I remember calling you, Shanti. I had already signed my contract, and there I was, like, understanding what was happening because my makeup artist was white. The person who was my stylist for hip hop clothing was white. The producers who were giving me the lines, or the writers, they were giving me new lines on set, and they were implementing a lot of AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English, into the script, right? Like the pop in and this, and these are all stereotyped version of white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal structures are building to be a quote, you know, a Black stereotype, right? And marketing to a particular audience, an audience. So Shanti, I remember telling you on set, like I called you, I was like, sis, this ain't it. Like, this is appropriating Black culture. And I did feel uncomfortable. At that point, I didn't know what to do because I'd signed my contract. So that was the situation and predicament I was in. And I do understand that I was complicit in it. So moving forward, how should I approach it, right? Or how would people in the entertainment space approach that is also important. So just to give a framework of the definitions and terms, our panelists, we met earlier this week to discuss what we will be speaking about. There are some key terms that are important to understand and know in this industry. So I'm going to have Jyotis go over some of those terms because he's an expert in critical race theory, and then we'll turn it to the rest of the panelists. So Jyotis, if you can go over our slides, that would be great.
Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that.
Let me see it. Okay, here we are. So.
All right. I don't know. I'm the type of person that needs all of the words on the list. I don't like the progressive thing. I hope. Yeah. Let's do 3 by 3 so that it's not overwhelming for our things. So ethnology is the study and characteristics of various people and the difference in relationships between them. I have studied that a lot, and it's pretty much the science that Europeans came up with in order to distinguish phenotypically what the different quote unquote races of the world are. There's no such thing as races, but because the Europeans spent centuries contriving scientific rationale behind why different races are different, phenotypically and also based on their value attached to that phenotype, we, in a racialized world, especially in the United States where it's heavily racialized, are fixated on those distinctions, so much so that even in the 21st century, you can go on Reddit and see people commenting using racialist terminology, both as a self-affirmation to identify their ethnic groups, or under white supremacist projects, or critical race theorists speaking about the history of this. So ethnology is critical and really frames why we see race the way we do in the United States today. Phenotype is the set of observable characteristics of an individual's appearance. So a phenotype of mine would be my skin color. It's dark brown. I have, thin hair, scraggly beard. So those are some of the phenotypes that I have. Dark eyes. All of those can be characterized. White supremacist patriarchal capitalist structures don't get overwhelmed by that term, but is ultimately pointing at the fact that our entire country, the United States, is centered around an axiology or a value system that comes out of Europe, and specifically the patriarchal culture of Europe, which benefits largely white males. And the reaffirmation of that maintains white supremacy in the United States. Okay, next few ones. All right, gatekeeping, white passing. Okay, gatekeeping is the activity of controlling and limiting access within industry. So for example, someone could say that if academics say that you're the only ones that are allowed to write about a certain subject, someone could accuse them of gatekeeping in the sense that they have certain expertise and they have a certain voice and only they can speak on a certain subject, while not giving access to people who are generally marginalized. White passing or passing is the idea of if you have a certain given phenotypes, in the sense you have light skin, light hair, colored eyes, all of these can potentially give you an avenue into being either maybe misracialized or passing or confused as white. And that gives you, in that accessibility that you have to looking like white, there may be certain ways that you're treated that allow you to move more easily through a white supremacist world. race bending is what happens when people are perceived as one ethnicity or another, and that's kind of what happened over here. Can you hear me? It says the internet's unstable. Cindy, you can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Great. Okay, great. So race bending is what happens. So for example, I have dark skin, but also I keep a beard. So I could be racialized multiple different ways in the United States. Some have racialized me as Muslim, even though that's a religion. That's a way people have racialized me. Some have misracialized me as Black, and then obviously as Indian. So when your phenotypes are not familiar to a larger group, there's a general tendency for that to happen and that to be exploited, especially when it comes to entertainment. And cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of customs, practices, ideas of one people or society or by members of another, typically more dominant people or society. So cultural appropriation, generally that's how history has conducted itself. Whenever cultures contact each other, there are things that they appropriate from each other, and that's how cultures grow. But when cultural appropriation becomes a problem is when there's a huge power differential. So the cultural production, whether it's tangible in the sense of like handicrafts, weaving styles, farming styles, all of this, religious customs, or it may be intangible. So the ways of speech, the ways of conducting movement of your body that are appropriated and then exploited by a dominant group for money. And because we live in a capitalist society, there's a huge tendency for that to happen. And you see this with the appropriation of tribal prints among Native Americans, in this incident specifically of Black culture, both music, aesthetics, and many other values of Black culture that are appropriated. And generally it becomes a major issue when Black artists are not compensated for, or a cultural group is not compensated for the work that they put out there because some other group is exploiting their cultural production. Cultural appreciation is when someone understands and learns about another culture in an effort to broaden their perspective and connect with others cross-culturally. This can tinge over to cultural appropriation. So you may appreciate another culture, like you read a lot about this ethnicity, or when you go travel. So for example, if you're going to Italy, you learn about the Italian culture, the food and everything, the architecture. But the thing is, when these power differentials exist between two different cultures, for example, white and Black culture, there's a tendency where you may cross over and misappropriate certain things, like ritual items or religious items are generally those things that can be misappropriated because you don't have the cultural context to know how to treat it or to value it. And then acting tropes are characterized or racial ethnic stereotypes in acting. Again, this comes out of ethnology. There were certain phenotypes that were expressed and paralleled across with zoology. So like if you have like the lower races, so non-white races were closer or said to be akin to animals. And so exaggerated features were used when they were caricaturing. And this happens all across different cultures where a dominant group caricatures a subordinated group, or conflicting ethnic groups do that. But in the US, it has a notorious history, especially with the caricaturing of Native Americans. You can see, like, for example, the Redskins logo, and also the caricaturing of Black people through the history of minstrel shows, where people would put, especially white people, would put black paint on their face and act in stereotypical exaggerated forms to mock African Americans. So cultural tropes are generally, that's an example of it. And then a monolith is a political, corporate, or social structure regarded as interchangeably uniform. Code switching happens, it's the practice of alternating between two or more languages or varieties of a language in conversation. So for example, if I'm speaking with my parents, I may speak in Malayalam when I'm outside just to have a secret language. Or I may speak in Malayalam to another Malayali to show solidarity that we are from the same ethnic group or same ethno-linguistic group. In African American culture, because there are dialect differences, there's a tendency when around dominant groups or non-African American people to speak in African American vernacular English, which is also known as Ebonics, a dialect that developed out of the South and has influences both from West African languages phonetically, as well as other English dialects that were in the South. And it's a unique cultural development of African Americans. And they switch between that and standard English depending on the space. And it can be a cultural signifier or it could be a signifier of solidarity, and also a signifier of exclusion, like to draw your social circles. Colorblind casting is the activity of casting and individuals in a production that does not take into consideration their ethnic or racial background. This tends to happen all the time. You can look at the history of Hollywood, where white actors played ethnic minorities, uh, and they would put paint on their face or exaggerate their eyes, their hair, whatever, and wear costumes. That's one history, but in the 21st century, there's a tendency for that to do. So if you watch Modern Family, there's an episode, I think it was season 2, episode 7, something like that, where the child, Lily, is Vietnamese in origin, but she was casted to play the role of a Japanese child in this stereotypical Godzilla film and speak in a mock Japanese accent. Um, so the ability, because you share like this ambiguous phenotype, you're able to be put in these situations. And there's a tendency to do that because you can then avoid either allocating resources to the group that you're trying to portray, or to avoid conflict because you can then exaggerate the stereotypes without backlash, because the group that you're trying to portray or stereotype may not give you backlash for the explicitly offensive things that you may be trying to do. Erasure is erasing of someone or someone, something or someone. And that happens when and it happens with the colorblind casting, where you cast people and then erase the entire history. This especially happens in movies about the Stonewall riots, where the demographics that it shows of the casting, so they got gay white male instead of trans women of color, who were generally the ones at the forefront of leading those movements. And one way of erasing history is by doing that. So that's all the vocabulary. I think we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, I don't know if I took up too much time. But just so we know, in terms of colors, I don't know how many people in the United States know this, but because South Asians are maybe like 4% of the US population, many people don't know we are also a dark-skinned population. It's very densely populated, especially in the South Asian subcontinent. But generally in Northeast India and Southern India are the darkest skin populations, where the average skin tone would be some skin tone like Sunny and I, and it can go darker all the way to black skin. And the darkest people in the world actually are in West Africa, like in Senegal, in South Sudan, in Angola. And also there are dark-skinned people who are indigenously from Melanesia, which are the islands off of Papua New Guinea to the east. Sunny, if you could move with your mouse there just to show people where Papua New Guinea is. Right above the continent of Australia, there are islands over there which have black populations, black-skinned populations. But doesn't mean we're all from the same race or should share the same phenotypes. We just share in terms of the skin color. And this is the reality we have to face, is that for generally people from homogenous phenotypic communities, they're not used to seeing people outside of their phenotypic group. And so they just see like an ambiguous morph, pure dark skin. There's a tendency to just blur you into a category of dark skinned people. And all of these populations have independently either been identified as black by the Europeans that have arrived, or another light skinned population that has arrived, or self-identify as black, either in the indigenous languages or in the European languages that they speak. But in the US, when we say black, we're specifically talking about people descending from Black Africa or Black Africana people. But that does not necessarily mean all Black people in the US have the same skin tone, but from their originary populations on the continent, especially coming from West Africa and all the way up to Mozambique, the tendency is much darker skin, and that actually has to do with the response to being closer to the equator. More melanin gives you more protection from the sun, but that means you have to be out there 3 hours, 4 hours to get your vitamin D synthesis. So my dark skinned brothers and sisters out there, make sure you take your vitamin D pills. You especially need it in the middle of this pandemic. But that's all I really have. And I think the other speakers can chime in, and Sunny and Shanti, go ahead and lead the discussion.
I mean, that was a whole lot, Jyotis. That was the dissertation.
Yeah. That was a dissertation.
That was a dissertation. So thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. And for those of you watching, I definitely learned something, and we'll definitely be looking back at those terms as a reference point. I wanted to ask the other panelists to chime in, and Ben, if you could sort of give us the breakdown of the Subway production itself and how the decision-making process was I don't know, curated, I guess. I don't know how the entire design of the production came into effect before the actual day of the filming would be helpful.
Yeah. So for context, there's Subway, the client who wants to sell some sandwiches. They hire an agency. The agency kind of comes up with this concept for selling those sandwiches. In this instance, this was a social campaign for social media, 3 different spots, and they were all supposed to be referencing unboxing videos, like YouTube unboxing videos of influencers kind of unboxing various products or things. And lo and behold, in these, it was supposed to sort of comedically be, instead of a pair of shoes, it's a Subway sandwich. Instead of the 2 other ones besides Cindy's, which was shoes, were tech, so like a new phone or something. And then there was a beauty one as well. So Subway comes to the agency comes to that, and then I become involved as a director and with my production company and sort of kind of making that come to light. So I get the crew, the DP, figure out how we're going to shoot it, overhead camera. And then I reach out to Shanti at that point to figure out who's going to be in it. I've worked with her before. She's great. And we sort of together she 100% did a huge full of casting that then helped narrow down, and then kind of the agency kind of came with our final decisions on which performers were going to be in which roles for these 3 things. Yeah, and then we're on set. So that timeline is, a few weeks of pre-production meetings, all that stuff. And yeah, then we were 1 long day, should have been 2, of shooting on set together. I hope that helps kind of frame it a little bit.
That does help. And Des and Brandon, if you could share, what were some of your thoughts as you saw that commercial, and what comes to mind as, we understand the co-opting of Black culture within entertainment, and how those decisions are made?
Right. I think that it was horrifying, actually, to watch, but no more horrifying than so many other culturally appropriative commercials that we've seen. And so, as we had discussed yesterday, I think the problem is that, and again, no disrespect to Shanti or Ben, in terms of your role and in terms of your input, but the problem is that there aren't enough people of color, woke, culturally, richly understanding of all of what Jyotis just explained, people in decision-making positions. And so, statistically, it is rarely women, rarely fat people, rarely people of intersecting identities. And so there's no one in the room, it's like, hey, where's Jamal? Where's Desi? Where are the people who can say, abort this mission? This is not cool. This is horrifying. That's the problem, that we don't have enough people in power positions making those decisions. And so to get to what Jyotis had discussed is that we live in this white patriarchal capitalist society. So everything is about white men making decisions about how much money they're going to make on this next commercial, and being culturally appropriative, practicing erasure. None of that shit matters to them, because the bottom line is the bottom line. And so when Sini shows up and she's like, hey, this feels awful, you're not in a position to say anything at that point, because you've already signed your contract. Ben's already got the cameras rolling, and Shanti's already cast the people. And so the next layer of that, in terms of what can be done, and these are very difficult decisions, is that there is an incredible amount of sacrifice that people have to make, particularly non-Black people of color who are looking to tamp out racism in entertainment, in their families. Like, people have to check their families. You have to check your Indian aunt who's calling, someone, a hapshi, you know, when they start using language like that, and you're going to lose friends, your family's going to be upset with you, Thanksgiving is going to be uncomfortable. And so if the commitment that you're making is to address racism, then it has to come with some level of sacrifice. I have a very good dear friend, her name is Jennifer Posner. She will not sit on panels. She's a white woman. She will not sit on panels that are all male and all white. If she's asked to sit on a media panel, she will say, what is the makeup of this panel? I will not sit on this panel if it is all white. I can make a recommendation to you of a person of color, a woman who can sit on this panel. And I think that's the difficult decision that you have to make. Are you going to get up in the middle of the shoot and say, I'm not going to be a makeup artist who's going to put indigenous paint on a model's face before she walks out on a runway? I'm not going to do it. And you pack up your brushes and you leave. And that means sacrificing money, sacrificing your reputation, sacrificing your place on the PTA if you're a mom who's going to call it out in another parent. And I think that's where we are right now. If we're really looking to make that difference, there is an incredible amount of sacrifice that needs to happen if we're going to call people out or call people in and say, I can't participate in this.
Mm-hmm. That's true, leveraging. Yeah, Brandon?
I was going to say, I 100% agree with her on that. Is the idea of it being inconvenience is something people are very adverse to. Like, if it's in your face, oh, don't do that. That's not cool. But if you are a part of the situation leading up to it, you're quiet to it. But once it's in your face and you see, oh, I have to do something for this, then you're more called to action once it disturbs you. But if you're able to go throughout your daily life and not have any thoughts about it, then it's whatever to you. It's only up until that point where you as a person is inconvenienced by what is happening.
100%. So in terms of, Desi, as you were speaking about having more people of color in the room, right? I mean, because we live in a white, capitalist, patriarchal society, and we're living in that structure day in and day out, right? How do we move forward with, how do we move forward with our lives and all of these things, right? Because you mentioned before, because when we spoke yesterday, you said, I loved your quote. You said, not all skin folk are kin folk, right? And so people in the room that look like us, they're not always going to be on our side because they're still at the mercy of white patriarchal capitalistic structures, right?
Right.
So when we're operating within that structure, what can we do? And yesterday you also spoke about the degradation of erasure, right? Right. Like even when Shanti had mentioned yesterday when speaking about, she was trying to get as many people of color in the casting room, right? And even despite that, and as I was being cast, not only was there an erasure of my Indian identity, there was an erasure of like Blackness, right? Because there's not even the caricaturization of this Black stereotype, as you mentioned, is not even a whole person, right? It's just this one piece that is the image of what that white supremacist structure likes to draw out for people of color. And so even in that celebration of having, quote, diversity, it's at the erasure and it's at the erasure and the detriment of real actual lives and real people who are not represented at all or not even seen as their whole self. If you could speak to that, that would be, I would really appreciate that.
Right. I think it's difficult because it's a very intersectional issue. And so we're talking about power. We're talking about oftentimes gender, the folks that usually end up at the bottom of that decision making or who generally ends up being erased as Black women, generally dark-skinned Black women. And so when you think about statistically, Vice just had an article that said that skin bleaching is probably going to be a $31 billion industry by 2024. And so while people are actively trying to dismantle white supremacy, they are participating in it by bleaching their skin. And so there's a reckoning that has to happen personally, simultaneously, while we're trying to dismantle it structurally. And so while people are trying to kick in the door and get inside, and we talked about this, yesterday, that we feel like everything has to be a win. If we can get a person of color in the door, then it's a win, even if it is at the erasure of me, And so it's a very difficult situation. And so we have to be able to create levels of solidarity within communities of color. And that's very difficult when communities of color have this ability to kind of vacillate between being Latino or being Black, being Malaysian or being seen as Black, being an acceptable form of Black. And so you, Sini, have been put in this position of being an acceptable form of Black. And so, Black culture and the contributions that Black people make and other people of color permeate the world. And so hip hop and AAVE is, and the way that we dress and the way we put our foot in the way we cook and the way we do our hair and all of that shit is cool. And everybody wants to be a part of that. And everybody wants the rhythm, but nobody wants the blues. And so we have to be able to create levels of solidarity within people of color. You can't be cool with singing hip hop lyrics and using the N-word, and you want to be down and you want to be cool, and we have this shared identity of Blackness and brown skin, but then when it comes down to, standing up for Black lives or checking your family or, laughing at some shit online that is clowning Black women and comparing them to apes and monkeys, like, you can't have it both ways. And so there has to be a reckoning, and there has to be an understanding of what it is to be an ally to Black people, what it is to have solidarity with Black people. It means showing up in ways where you're checking yourself, you're checking your family, and you're also realizing that there will be some sacrifices that need to happen within your journey, in doing that. And so if we're participating in a white supremacist society that is built on capitalism and everybody is clawing their way at the top to the top, we have to realize the challenges that have been created to have the infighting between us. We have to be able to recognize that I can't come for you and be upset with you, Sini, because you have been put in a position to play a Black person when you didn't even realize what was happening at that moment. But can I still check you for saying, hey, when you saw that was happening, why didn't you just get the hell up and walk the hell out? Yes. Because now I'm asking you to check your coins, and I can't be dipping in your pocket and telling you that you have to give up a contract, or give up your money, and it's hard. Like some of the brands that we know, Garnier, Pond's, Vaseline, L'Oreal, all of these products that we all know and use and luxuriate in, these are the very same products that are also making skin bleaching creams. So are we going to check them and say, hey, I love that my skin's getting moisturized, but you're also putting, products out there that are completely participating in anti-Blackness? And so there are so many levels that we have to recognize if we're really truly looking to tamp out racism, tamp out anti-Blackness, and create solidarity, between us. We have to know what it is before we can really say, I'm standing up for Black lives. I think initially we know that police officers should not have their knee on a neck. That's a given. But when we really start getting into the layers, people really have to understand who police are, what that system was. Those were slave runs to re-enslave people. That's what police were originally doing before they became a force. So understanding structures, understanding how we participate in those structures, and understanding how we have been pitted against each other is vital if we're really looking to understand how something like the media system works.
100%.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I also think when things are pitted against each other, all we can do, I loved how you talked about solidarity and sort of the power of that. And it's different, but I was thinking when you mentioned that about the solidarity that we could have had on set, because I do think that like set is like, it's a powerful place. It really is. I mean, Cindy, I bet you felt this, Shanti, too. Like things are changing, people are yelling stuff, like things are kind of moving fast, and it's a thing, like decisions are getting made quickly. And I think it's, it's a venue where like the right kind of solidarity can really affect change, and it's small. It's just sort of bit by bit. But if I had known that Sydney was uncomfortable and that these things had changed, like, and I could have done more. If I was aware of that from her, I could have tried to do more on the other end, because in that moment, like they're already paying for that day. Like that day's the day. It's going to happen then. You know what I mean? So there's like a real kind of power to sort of like, even in that moment, if we can't go back to the boardrooms and go back to the, if we can't kind of initially or right away get into all those sort of things that happen before getting on set, like on set, you do have the capacity, you do have the potential to sort of like try and undo some of those mechanisms, to be like, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't me. And things have sort of changed, and I don't want this to proceed like it is now, So
Yeah.
again, it's a small venue, and I know we're talking about a much kind of larger system and sort of continuation of system, but I do think, at least for me personally, I do think I could have done more, and I do think that there is sort of a solidarity that members of a crew or members of the actors or people on set can have in that moment to kind of use that power in almost like a leverage kind of way to kind of stand against some of these larger things.
Yeah, and Ben, I would. Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was gonna say, well, even though it's a small change, it's still an important change. All these small changes lead up to the big change.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have the big switch without the small input from you, from me, from Shanti, from Cindy, from everyone to bring about like a better future for us all, essentially. Like the companies, big brands, are not really going to change what they're doing until it starts to affect their bottom line, the dollars. So the group of people, small units of people are coming together and showing this is not what we want. We're not going to stand for this. We don't want to participate in this. Then you have the brands saying, okay, we need to repivot. We need to start thinking of this differently, because our core demographic, our core consumers are no longer interested in the route we're taking to sell them, to advertise towards them. They don't like the conversation we're giving them. So we have to revamp the conversation and make it more adjacent to their beliefs, their values, and so forth. Brand loyalty right now is a big thing, but like once that brand loyalty is like taken away because it's no longer aligning with what you stand for, what you believe in, then it brings about a bigger change. So it all starts with one bit by bit by bit by bit. It all leads up to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
We're all shaking our heads, Brandon. I don't know, you can't see us.
No.
No, jumping off of what you were saying and what Ben's saying, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot has just been like, where are the moments? Like, if I could go back, where were the moments to jump in, right? So I originally came from advertising, and I left it because I thought it was incredibly sexist and incredibly racist. And I actually left it after I very vicariously tried to lead a coup against a campaign that was really sexist and racist, and did everything in my power to try to get it stopped, and it didn't. So I left and I went to another agency, same bag, different worms, and ended up starting and doing my own thing. So I think for me, coming from, a very kind of activisty background and going into these corporate spaces, my wall of always hitting was being too outspoken. And so it was interesting on this experience for me, because it felt very like subversive. Like, we are going to try to get as many people of color, as many minority people as we can into this casting as possible. And I was thrilled whenever the agency came back to us with their decisions of who was going to move forward, to see that all in all, there was a pretty even rate of the overall diversity that was moving forward. But what I did notice, and where I think like the opportunity for me to have pushed back on that, was that I didn't notice as many Black people moving forward into that final round as what there should have been. Just even if I looked at it, like, also did analytics in agency, so I was like totally doing the data and crunching all of this. And even when I look back on that, from a percentage wise of how many Black people we had that we brought in versus how many Black people made it to the final round, that was the number that dropped the most. And I think it became, you know, incredibly apparent in terms of what the actual script was, and you know, the right type of people that should have been cast. For me, I feel like that's the moment that I could have done a lot better. But I also think, you know, that kind of anecdote is a bit of a bigger context. Ben, Brandon, you know, you guys working on sets too and seeing it, there are a lot of fine pieces. Things come together very quickly. Things are changing on the fly. Cindy's getting script directions that aren't in her script. How, you know, I think I'd be interested to know from that director's perspective, you know, where do you guys feel like you have agency to step in and create those small changes from that director's seat? And then Desi, Jothis, I would love to kind of hear from your perspective, where people who are kind of in the production area of it, like I was, and you know, I think Cindy was interested too from her perspective as an actress. Where are the ways, like those small ways that we can step in that you guys were talking about, really in pre-production, so it doesn't come down to the day where we're sending the actor or the actress into the studio and they're like, wait, what's going on?
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I want to say quickly that, you know, the way that I've just sort of been thinking about this in my head a lot since our talk yesterday, and, you know, since we see it every time I watch that thing, it really stings. I wasn't involved in the edit, so even the takes themselves are the especially bad ones. But, you know, the way I word it in my head is, you know, I was really excited to be working with Cindy. Like, Cindy had the energy, Cindy had the vibe. Like, there was just like, that's where we started. We started with Cindy, and then you watch the thing and it's not her. What we did is we got away from Cindy, we got away from who she is, and what ended up with was a kind of awful characterization that's very far away from who she was. So I think, just to be quick here and kind of answer Shanti's question, I think that on set, that's a way that I could kind of go back to the powers that be, the money, whatever, and sort of just kind of make that point, which is like, hey, this person who's the star of this thing, like, we've sort of gotten away from her. Maybe let's sort of have her do a couple takes that feel closer to her. Let's try to kind of get back to Cindy. Let's try to get back to the person that we chose, the person that we cast, and the reason that we cast her, and away from these sort of other directions or, you know, stereotypes, basically. I don't know a better word to put it, that we're kind of putting it in her mouth instead. So again, that's just sort of thinking out loud. But to answer your question, Shanti, I do think that's kind of a way that someone in my capacity or a producer, or, you know, so that's a gentle way that we can be like, hey, we picked Cindy, this isn't Cindy. Like, is there a way that we can try to get closer to her? And then what I would do is go to Cindy and sort of have her sort of like lead whatever kind of takes or whatever kind of dialogue or whatever kind of tweaks kind of she felt got her closer to that.
As you're saying that, I do appreciate that, but as you're saying that, I'm still thinking to myself, even if you guys got closer to me, I was still being dressed in that way, right? Like the framework was still kicks, right? It was still this, even if you took the words away, it was still going to be profiting off of Black culture. And that's the problem, right? Like the entire framework is the problem. So I remember when we were speaking yesterday, I'd asked you guys, well, you know, I wish they did cast a Black person. And then Des and Brandon, you guys both checked me and you were like, no, because if they did cast a Black person, it would still be problematic, right? Yes. Because we're still co-opting Black culture. We're still co-opting Black culture for what? The bottom line, right? And that is what it means to live in a white supremacist capitalistic patriarchal structure, right? And so again, how do we combat that? Going back to your original question, Shanti, Des and Brendan.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a difficult beast because it's a large animal, and so we're seeing, you know, they're taking Aunt Jemima off the box. I think they're looking to get Uncle Ben's, you know, off the box, and so people are doing these kind of performative changes that speak to the moment, which is important. Like, you know, I think that people will sort of toss that out and say, well, you know, that's just performative. And entertainment is important because, you know, we discussed this yesterday, because it lives in the imagination of people. And so if you live in a place like that is not like New York City, where you don't get a chance to meet, you know, kind of the panel that we have here, where you don't get to have real intimate relationships with South Asian or Black or queer or fat people who, you know, love themselves. Entertainment and media is really the only space that you have to see that and to really feel connected to that. And so representation is wildly important, and that's why we, you know, we have hashtags and we have these you know, these kind of moments where it's like, you know, Oscars so white, because we want to know that not only is our work you know, being representative, but it is also being honored. And so there are all these layers by which we want to make sure that we have our full arc of existence in, you know, from casting all the way to award season. And so I think you know, so accountability within those spaces of power is very, very difficult. One of the suggestions that I would make is to check out organizations like Color of Change. Rashad Robinson does a great job in, you know, amplifying the voices of people of color by holding advertisers accountable. And so that's one space by which we can say, you know, there's a level of accountability that we can look at to say, hey, are you like sponsoring Fox News because they're doing this, you know, these horrible segments, and you still are advertising within that space? You know, so like not only is it the spaces by which the places are advertising, but also the advertisement itself, you know, we can be checking them on. And so looking at organizations that are unpacking and holding accountable and holding power to account. But shifting, you know, for a moment, where I was talking about how we get pitted against each other, I think even just asking the questions and making sure that we're even speaking up. Like, we oftentimes don't feel comfortable even speaking up and saying, you know, I'm looking at this script and I'm wondering, you know, who, is there someone on set who, you know, is the writer on set that is, you know, able to make this less racist? And so you throw that word up in there and it's like, oh, well, what do you mean? And that is at least going to spark a conversation, and it's at least going to let them know, like, this is some janky shit you want me to say right now. And I'm in a position right now where I already signed this contract and I'm going to say it, but you need to know that this was pretty foul, that that the script is here, you know. And that might make it, again, this is the level of sacrifice that I'm talking about. It might make it difficult to book that next gig when you check the director and you check the copywriter and the script writer, you know, on what they've done. But if we're going to show up in these spaces trying to affect change, then it has to happen at some level, because what ends up happening is you get erased, and then I get erased because I wasn't considered for that gig. And then, you know, we're perpetuating this, literally this anti-Blackness, because, you know, you, Sini, will, you know, being the complexion you are, and of course race and color is relative, you know, I'm not going to see you as the love interest in a Bollywood film.
Mm-hmm.
But you might be considered the love interest of a Black man in a movie in the United States of America, because, you know, we're not amplifying dark Black women, which was why Black Panther was such a triumph. because not only was the Blackness of the film just so prominent in terms of, you know, in front of and behind the scenes, but also like seeing women in power, seeing a dark-skinned lead who was a romantic interest with her natural hair. Like, I can't even say the last time I saw that. And so it's important to know that if we're not speaking up, then we're continuing to not only participate in your, you know, your own erasure, but also the erasure of Black people, and understanding how there's kind of that degradation, you know, of erasure.
Mhm. No, that's powerful. That's powerful. Brandon, I'd like for you to chime in, but before you do, I just want to let the audience know if you guys have if you guys have any questions, now is the time to send that to our team. We have about 15, 20 more minutes, and then we're going to close out the conversation. But Brandon, I know your wheels are turning, so I'd like to know your thoughts.
Yes. So, like when it comes to these commercials and all these this content, this social content, media content and all that we are getting from company brands, when it comes through like the agency pipeline, when the agency like you're in a Subway commercial, for instance, when that script was being written by the copywriter or the creative director at that agency, there should have been people there to QC it, quality control it, check it. Is this good? Does this give up any red flags? You know, having those pillars in place to make sure you're not putting something that's culturally questionable or culturally offensive. It goes miles beyond what we have here right now as the standard practice. So just having that idea of a filter of sorts within the agency, and also a filter of sorts within the brands before they hit the consumer or the consumer eyes or television or YouTube or whatever social channel that is going on, will help change the conversation dramatically. And a lot of times, granted, these companies may not have, they may not have enough, in this instance, let's say like a Black accountants or Black execs or Black juniors or Black creators to like do that filtering. But one thing that's starting to become more and more prominent is cultural and diversity units or wings to buildings. So if you don't have those people in place, like circle back to your HR people or your culture and inclusion diversity, say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Are we going in the right trajectory, or are we going down a hill we don't want to go? That's part of it on the creation side with the agency. Because normally when it comes to the director, you're limited, depending on what part of the production you come in, you're limited in what you can do. You know, you can say, hey, I'm not going to do this. I don't like this. But all right, fine, we're going to find somebody else who this vision aligns with, and they will execute it and continue going onward. Normally, but with me, I noticed that when I'm getting these conversations, I'm getting hit up for pitches to, oh, we have this spot, we think you'd be great to direct it, we'd like to have you pitch on it. Like I'm asking those questions like, what's the crew gonna, like how much control do I have over the crew, casting, and things like that? Is the script already done? Can I be part of the writing process for it? Just trying to interject myself as much as possible into the work to make sure it is like, even though it's just a job that I'm doing, making sure it's also a representation of what I stand for, what I believe in to some extent. Because I feel like visually, you're only as good as the last thing you put out when you're a cinematographer or you're a director or within that creative space. So there is a lot that is attached to your name when you're doing something. And when you're a person of quality control, you don't want to normally just put out whatever you put out. But at the same time, it is money. You have to it's a delicate balance for each and every person involved in it. And also what I'm seeing is the difficult thing that I'm seeing is a lot of times when you are the cinematographer or the director, you're coming on these projects, they already have a production company in place where they want to use their own people. So, okay, fine, make it a mandate the people that we are going to have, and let there be a mixture of people of color. There's been times when I know a director hires me, reaches out to me, or the producer reaches out to me to be the cinematographer, the DP, and if I can't bring my own people on it, and I end up usually being like the only person of color there. If the director himself was not a person, him or her was not a person of color. So it's really about being accountable and making the sacrifices whenever possible. And again, it starts with the consumers. The more the consumers say we don't like this, we don't want this, it will lead to change. And within the film community, that is slowly but surely happening. Where we're having a lot more organizations forming around that to promote the diversity within the workforce in film. And you also have a lot of awards are now starting to make that mandate, like they have BAFTA. They're putting for more of diversity inclusion in the crew and also the cast. That's happening if you want to be eligible for the awards seasons as they come up. Now, a lot of time for like studios and production companies where the prestige of an award is part of the reason why you do it. You want to get these accolades as they represent the wins among your peers, amongst your competitors, and so forth. You says, okay, if I want to be in this, then I have to change what I'm doing in order to do it, to be eligible for it. So it's just the more constructs we make that make entry difficult or make it inconvenient for the powers that be, the people with the dollars, the people who benefit from our culture, then that change will come. But you got to make that accountability for it. And here's another funny thing that I noticed is you will have people of color, Black people within those rooms, but they're often they can be here today and gone tomorrow. They can hire you or fire you. They can hire you for any reason. They can fire you for any reason. And that just creates a certain level of fear amongst the workforce that's in place at all of these companies, these brands, these institutions. So it's like breaking down that will help to promote the idea of this change being able to take place, I think, as well.
Brandon,
So many snaps, Brandon.
Yeah.
So many snaps.
Huh?
Brandon, that was such a great contribution that you just made, and you made me think of Frances McDormand when she had gotten her Oscar for the 3 Billboards film, and she said inclusion writer, and it makes me think of that because that particular writer that an actor or director gets, particularly ones that have clout, means that if there is ever an opportunity to include someone who is underrepresented, someone who is marginalized for any part in front of or behind the scenes, that is an opportunity to do that. And so that sounds a lot like what you had just mentioned. Yeah.
More and more companies and institutions are starting to do that. But it needs to become the norm. It's not like, oh, they're exception,
Right.
And Brandon, something else that you said that I thought was incredibly important is that minority individuals are hired in, but they aren't given a safe space to know that they will stay in. And I'll just say,
no, they're not. Yeah.
The second agency I worked at, my own manager told me that a Chinese woman was hired in to own an account because the client was Chinese. And then as soon as the account was lost, she was told that her English was not good enough and she was fired. So this is an absolutely real thing. Your place at a corporation, especially within the ad world, especially as a minority, is conditional. And that is absolutely not okay. It's 2020. Brandon, I would just like to take a step further from what you said in terms of, if Black people or women creatives are not in the room, like they need to be in the room. Like there's no excuse anymore. We have enough Black creatives, we have enough brown creatives, we have enough women creatives that if there are parts that are being written for these people, they need to be writing the parts or supporting the writing of the parts. And I personally do not think that agencies are doing a good enough job of doing that, and they need to get on that ASAP. And those people need to feel like they are in positions of power to be able to speak up and not to have some sort of backlash where they're not put on an account again, or they're frozen out of account, or worse, they're kicked out of a company. And that can't be the standard anymore.
Yeah, totally. Like I can go into a pitch, you know, like not even a pitch. I won the pitch. I'm going in. We're doing the pre-production. You know, we have their producer who can be a white person. And let's say we have people of color that the juniors are, or junior producers, or associate producers, or production, whatever. They have a title that's underneath that producer. You talk about something. If I ask the producer first, what do you think of this? No, I don't like it. Or he says he don't like it. She says she doesn't like it. Then I go to the junior person that says, "Oh, do you feel the same way?" There will be a hesitation from them based on what their supervisor or the person directly above them has said, and they will turn themselves to go with that direction. But if I ask that junior person before I ask that senior person, nine times out of 10, the conversation will be extremely different, and they will give an opinionated answer. And then you have the senior person, more so educated and second guessing. Is like, okay, you're in line with this, she's in line with this. Maybe I need to be in line with this as well. So it's like power is just such an interesting thing.
I wanted to add this thing just to tie things together. So because I do anti-colonial epistemology, I think a lot of things like Desi, Brandon, Ben and Shanti have been bringing up, and Sini, all of y'all have been bringing up, is that there's ways in which we can resist this. One of this is maybe get representation in rooms where representation is lacking, especially voices that are lacking. But we know we are faced with a system that does not allow that, because they will have one token. And I know this because I have played the token in my undergraduate career, where they'll have one, and once that person is unseated, then they'll bring in the other one. But once they have one face in there, that's enough, they're checked off the boxes. And South Asians, dark-skinned peoples from other parts of the world, especially when you come in a migrant to the US, coming from West Africa or coming from the Caribbean, affirmative action policies that were meant to bring up the African American community, by that I mean those descended from slaves in the US specifically. That community, the justice that was supposed to be done to that community was displaced by these safe, dark faces coming from other parts of the world, because as migrants, we won't challenge it, and we generally have secure networks that won't push against us. Another thing in terms of anti-colonial epistemology is we've been talking a lot about the entertainment industry. I thought some great conversation happened here. But another thing that we can do as consumers, those who are not in the entertainment industry, Desi has been pointing at this. The movie Black Panther was the first time, or one of the few instances of dark-skinned Black women with their natural hair and dark beauty being on the front. Make the conscious choice to consume things produced by Black creatives. Make the conscious choice to read Black authors. Make the conscious choice to read people who are non-European, because not only will that give you ways to resist this, but it will surround you with information so that you can actively work against this. So you don't just consume stereotypes when you're aware that this is a stereotype, push back against it, but also refuse to consume from that outlet. And that may be a way to fund and move money to Black-owned industries, Black-owned creative industries, and funnel money to other Black and other non-white folks who are leading this. And with our money, we can challenge this, because if you think about this commercial, this was an aim. I am not going to point fingers, but there was somewhere the narrative came along that this is a way to portray a certain group because it will target and attract a certain demographic. If there is such a demographic, the demographic, once seeing that and seeing the inauthenticity in what was being portrayed, will choose to put their money somewhere else. And in that act of choosing to put their money somewhere else, we're not going to consume things that advertise or think this is the way to advertise to us. And in that process, you're participating in anti-colonial epistemology or anti-colonial resistance, because you're like, I refuse to put my money if this is going to be a capitalist society, and that's where I'm forced to be because I'm non-white, and due to global colonialism and slavery, this is the position that I'm in. I'm not going to put my money here anymore. Instead, I'm going to create worlds and possibilities and futurities that are invested in anti-colonialism and specifically in the betterment of non-white folks, specifically Black folks in the US. Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, Jopis, yes.
Just want to make sure that we're using the word enslaved and not slaves.
Enslaved, yes.
Enslaved peoples, not slaves.
Yeah.
And so, Des, I know you had a few thoughts going. I could see it.
No, I think Jopis like put the button on it right there. Definitely. Yeah. Maybe we'll take some questions.
Yeah. So
are we ready for that?
We actually do not have questions, but I had one question
Okay.
As a
so we'll get to ask each other questions.
Exactly. No, I was thinking as all of you were speaking, as non-Black people of color, and then we'll wrap this up in about 5 to 7 minutes. As non-Black people of color, right? And I spoke with you, Des, about this yesterday as well. Like, I'm a New Yorker, right? And so this is my corporate voice, right? So when I'm with my girlfriends, or when I'm with my fam, or when I'm with, when I'm not in the workspace or when I'm not on camera, right? A whole different city is there, right? Because I'm from New York, and that's going to come out. And so, and as we spoke about yesterday, New York culture in many ways is Black culture, right? Because Black people shaped American culture 100%, right? So as non-Black people of color, and us participating in that culture, one, are we allowed, right? And that's the other piece that I go back and forth with, because people are like, oh, you're being appropriative, you're being this, X, Y, Z. Like, no. Like, that's that's who I am, And so there's that other piece of it too, like how much do we dip in and out, and like where is the line? And so that was my question as a non-Black person of color.
Yeah. I think it's difficult because culture is so fluid sometimes. And so, like I said earlier, Black people have permeated the world's culture. So it would be impossible for people to not dip into Black culture, because Black people have cemented so much of what we understand and know and enjoy, today. But I think, when we think of being appropriative, I think it's important to, understand that we can't participate in things and act as though we've created some new thing, right? It's important that people understand and continually honor, especially if we're on a journey of being anti-racist. It is a journey of consistently understanding, where can I check myself? Like, there are things that I don't, do anymore. I don't, say things like gypped, because it marginalizes gypsies and gypsy culture. And I didn't know that. And so when I learned that, I don't do that anymore. And so I think that we can always be better. We can always be checking ourselves, and we have to be in that space of grace, for each other. I think there are some things that are just, clearly ridiculous and wrong. And I mean, like, nobody owns culture, but I do think it's important that people understand that, appropriating culture is like when you are, you're a conservative person and you're on a talk show, and I'm not going to mention any names, but if you happen to be a blonde person on a talk show that comes on at 11 a.m. on ABC, and you wear cornrows, and people come for you, and people are like, you're culturally appropriating, and you feel kind of hurt about that, and you say, well, I don't want to hurt people. It's like, you have to recognize that you're part of a political party that is conservative, that is passing legislation actively that harms Black people. And a lot of that trickles down into school boards that are telling young Black girls like myself that they can't wear braids, or that they can't get jobs wearing braids, but you're sitting on national television making it okay to wear braids for you. And so, like, we have to understand that sometimes we are culturally part of a space and of a geography that, you know, where we all kind of participate. And then there are other spaces where it's like you're using this culture, you're putting it on like a costume and you think it's cute and trendy, but then you're also participating in a system that is actively harming the people who created the freaking culture that you're appropriating. So I think that's kind of the difference. Understanding where we sit and understand each other geographically, understanding that if it's okay for you and, you know, Black guys think you're cute and you're cool for saying that, but I'm not, it's not okay for me to say it, then that's where you can begin to have those conversations and say, well, why was that okay for me, but that wasn't okay for her? And again, there's a piece of sacrifice that always comes, you know, when we're trying to move forward with anti-racism. Anti-racism is a beast. It's an awful a journey that has gotten us to here, and so we're going to have to pick some scabs to get out of it.
100%. So we are wrapping up the conversation. Des, that was just a great tie into everything. If anyone else has anything to share, we can. Did anyone have any closing comments?
I just wanted to say that, like, I feel so empowered after this conversation, in part because I really did feel that I couldn't and I didn't have the right to say anything when I was there, you know, and really Brandon, Desi, Jothis, like listening to you guys talk, like it slowed down so much of the process for me, and it really helped me identify like the nuances of what was actually happening in the situation and when I could have stepped in and done something. So I mean, like, and you know, as a woman of color creatively in these spaces, you pick your battles, right? And I can definitely recognize now that this was a battle I should have picked. And I definitely feel empowered to pick it now in a way that I don't think I ever did when I was working in agency world. And I don't think I did until this conversation tonight. So thank you all. Because I know that this is, I mean, so much of the work that you guys do is unpaid, you know, and you are giving so much of your lives to it every single moment. So I'm just grateful to have had you guys and to have been able to learn from you guys sincerely in just the most heartfelt way. And I'm so thankful for the time with all of you.
It was wonderful. Thank you for including me in this conversation. It's important, and it's the beginning of more conversations to be had.
Yes, likewise. You know, thank you for thinking of me and including me in this conversation, and just for generally having this dialogue come to life. I mean, this dialogue and more dialogue like it is what is needed. This is what helps to change the narrative, which has been painted for 400 plus years. Yeah, it's very much needed, and I'm all for it.
Definitely, Brandon.
And I wanted to say thank you to Sini. Strangely enough, like I was thinking there were moments in my history too where I have done things that I didn't own up to. And seeing you able to own up to it, especially with like the backlash, as really framed, and cultural appropriation will happen. And it's not just going to be against Black people, but against other ethnicities. And there's power differentials which you may not be aware of, but if you own up to it, you can at least have a conversation and people are more forgiving. So I think that's a great thing that you did. But thank you so much for the other speakers, Desi, Brandon, Ben, and Shanti, for also being here.
Yeah.
And I will also say, don't feel you cannot participate in Black culture, because without Black culture, life will be very boring. But just if you come across like a situation you're in and you're not fully understanding of it, you know, check with people, check with like your Black friends or other people of color that you have in your life, and bounce it off them before executing it, you know, whenever possible. If you don't have that direct person there to check what you're doing against, or checking what you're experiencing against as well. Because even though what's cool to one person may not be cool to another person or another collective, but it just gives you a better perspective of what is happening within that particular community or that particular segment of what you're experiencing or trying to experience.
When in doubt, don't do it.
Yes, when in doubt, don't do it.
Love that, love that. Right. Ben, did you have anything else to share? Or what changes you may see in the industry moving forward? Or how, since you own a production company as well, you have power in being able to make these decisions.
Yeah, I mean, like if one is my company at the helm, I mean, it's always diverse. There's a lot of women and there's a lot of people of color. And usually the only person who is the majority is the client. And that's how I try to keep it moving whenever possible.
Ben as well.
My desire is always to disrupt spaces. I mean, hey, I'm a thick, dark Black woman, and so I'm going to be seen as a troublemaker anyway, you know, whether I have my hair in braids or whether I'm having it relaxed and I'm wearing a blue suit. I'm always going to, if I ever speak up about anything, will be seen as a troublemaker. So I have decided that that is my lot in life. And so I will disrupt spaces when I have the opportunity.
Ben,
And thank you for allowing me to come here and disrupt.
Of course, of course. Ben,
And thank you for your bravery, Sini. I know that it was difficult to have to navigate.
I'm not gonna lie, I was scared.
Yeah, that online shit is like.
I was great. I'm scared of the comment section. They had me shook. I was like, no.
Folks are gangster. Yes, yes, yes.
They had me shook for real. But I knew, like, you know, I believe in the power of the universe, and anything that happens, you have to bring it to light. You have to own it. You have to be there. And that's why also this is a lesson for me. You know, now I'm grateful. I'm grateful to the comment section and all the commentators, because this is a checking point for me, and also for me to know and realize that moving forward, I'm going to say no. I have to say no. Like, you know, and that's what it involves, does what you said. It involves sacrifice, right? And when you have power and privilege, as a brown person in this country, I have privilege, right? And so I have to be able to use that privilege to say no in building an anti-racist role. If there are not Black people in the room making decisions, it's a no. It has to be. And so that practice, that continuous practice, it's like a muscle, right? And being anti-racist is like a muscle. You have to exercise it,
Right,
so that it becomes strong. And that's where
Yes.
I'm still learning. And as a brown person, I'm going to make mistakes. Again, I am a racialized person in this country, but I will never be a Black person, and I will never know what that Black experience is like in the United States. And so I will make mistakes. And knowing that, how do we move forward as a Malayali community, as a brown community, as a South Asian community? And that's the most important thing.
and I think when we're doing the work, it's always important to understand that you can walk through the world with simultaneous oppression and privilege. You know, I'm a thick, dark-skinned Black woman, and that, you know, I show up in the world in a very particular way, and there are obstacles that have been put before me, you know, for having those identities. But I'm also straight and cisgender and able-bodied and educated and getting a PhD, and all of those things offer me a tremendous amount of privilege. And so it's a constant understanding of, you know, knowing that there are times that I can show up for other people, you know, in ways that I need other people to show up for me. And I recognize that.
Yeah, and I have a lot of gratitude towards Cindy for kind of showing up for all of this. I mean, this conversation doesn't happen without you speaking up now and speaking up after the fact, to, like, you know, saying that you want to do better. And that's the exact same thing that I'm saying now too, you know, like in my role, both as director and as someone in the production company, people I hire, like, yeah, I want to do better. I want to like seek more of this kind of understanding so I can do better. And none of that for me personally, or none of that just kind of spend this time with you guys in this conversation is possible without you, Cindy. So I really want to thank you for starting and continuing this conversation so we can all move forward in a more productive way.
So thank you all again. This has been such a fruitful conversation, such a rich conversation. And I hope that this is one of many conversations that we can have, because there's so much to unpack here that it's you know, we can go on for days. I was just thinking about so many of the things we spoke about yesterday that we didn't touch on here. I was like, oh my God, I wish the audience knew. So
today's the second part.
Yes,
yeah, maybe it's a mini series, Cindy. It's going to be a mini series.
So we thank you all for participating, Des and Brandon. We really appreciate you as Black people coming here and educating our population, and taking your time to do that. Like that's incredible. And we know that we need to do the work. So this is a call to action for brown people to own up to our complicity, own up to ways that we are anti-Black, and how can we make those changes in our everyday practice. So we're going to close this out. I want to give a huge shout out to all of you all for participating as panelists, for the MBLM team for curating this, Shanti for bringing Spinster as a partner, and for Brown Girl Magazine as a partner as well, for promoting and sharing this to our wider South Asian community. This is a critical conversation, and we hope to continue that. And also to DB Collective for the incredible graphics that y'all be putting out there for us. I mean, we're just looking fly on social media. What can we say? Brian and your team, y'all out here. Y'all out here. So we thank you all. We hope you follow us on Instagram and on the Facebook page, and more to come for cultural appropriation and race bending and racism in entertainment. Stay tuned. Next week, we have our structural racism series on racism or educational racism and the segregation that is present in our school system as we are about to open schools. As we get on into that conversation, we hope that you guys tune in, and we thank you all for participating. Bye.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, guys.
You guys are awesome.